A dying Navy SEAL refused all help from the staff at St. Jude's General. A nurse, disgraced by her superiors and one mistake away from termination, was sent in as a final, desperate measure. A small, jagged scar on her wrist, a relic of a life she kept buried, changed everything. Now let me take you inside the four walls of that pressurized room where a silent war was about to be won. The air in the ward was a tired cocktail of bleach, reheated coffee, and quiet desperation. It was a smell Clara Hale had learned to breathe as if it were oxygen, a scent she associated with the relentless, metronomic rhythm of life and death. Her shoes, sensible and worn, made no sound on the polished linoleum. Silence was a tool of her trade, a way to move through the chaos without adding to it. She was a ghost in pale blue scrubs, her movements efficient, her face a carefully constructed mask of professional calm. Tonight, the usual low hum of the hospital was pierced by a sharper, more urgent frequency. It had arrived an hour ago on a gurney, a whirlwind of paramedics, shouted acronyms, and the dark, metallic scent of blood. The patient in ICU room 3 was not just a man. He was an event, a walking, or rather non-walking, headline. Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Vance. The name echoed down the hallways, whispered between nurses and residents. A Navy SEAL. The words carried a weight that bent the air around them. He was a piece of mythology made flesh, and that flesh was grievously wounded. The official story, filtered down through the administrative channels, was a training accident, a fall, a litany of broken bones, internal bleeding, a severe concussion. But the tension that radiated from his room suggested something more. It was a locked door in the middle of an open ward. Clara had watched from a distance as Dr. Evans, a seasoned trauma surgeon with hands as steady as granite, had been rebuffed. Then Nurse Ratchet, a woman who could intimidate a charging bull into quiet compliance, had retreated from the room, her face pale. They said the man inside was a cornered animal, lashing out, refusing all assessment, all medication, all help. He had ripped an IV from his own arm, the saline bag crashing to the floor. He had sworn at anyone who came within 5 feet of his bed, his voice a low, gravelly threat that promised violence despite his injuries. He was dying, and he was doing it on his own damn terms. And that was when Dr. Alistair Finch had made his grand entrance. Finch didn't walk, he glided. He moved through the hospital, not as a healer, but as a proprietor inspecting his holdings. His suit was Italian, a whisper of dark gray silk that probably cost more than Clara's car. His shoes clicked with an arrogant, percussive rhythm against the floor. A gold watch gleamed on his wrist as he gestured, his manicured hands slicing the air. He was the chief of surgery, a man who collected titles and accolades the way other people collected stamps. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. Clara was refilling a tray of sterile dressings when he stopped directly behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. The air grew colder, heavier. "Nurse Hale," he said. His voice was smooth as expensive whiskey, but with a bitter aftertaste. He did not use her first name. He never did. She turned slowly, her hands still. Dr. Finch. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, flickered over her, a quick, dismissive appraisal that made her feel like a piece of faulty equipment. He had never liked her. She was too quiet, too efficient. Her competence was an unspoken challenge to his blustering authority. He thrived on drama, on sycophants, on the little fiefdom he had built. Clara was none of those things. She was just good at her job. In Finch's world, that was a sin. "We have a situation in ICU 3, he said, stating the obvious. "A highly decorated, very important patient is behaving poorly." Clara said nothing. She knew better than to offer an opinion unless directly asked. "He's refusing treatment. He's a risk to himself and a legal nightmare for this hospital," Finch continued, his jaw tight. "I need someone to go in there and get him under control. Sedate him if you have to. I'll sign off on it." The order hung in the air, a violation of a dozen protocols. Forcibly sedating a conscious, refusing patient was assault, dressed up in medical jargon. It was a line you did not cross. Clara's eyes met his. She saw the glint of malice there. This wasn't a medical decision. It was a punishment, a test. He was setting her up. If she refused, it was insubordination. If she failed, it was her incompetence. If she succeeded by breaking the rules, he would hold it over her head forever. "The other nurses have tried," Clara stated, her voice even. "And they have failed," Finch snapped. "You, on the other hand, Hale, are on thin ice as it is after that little incident last month." The little incident had been Clara correctly identifying a misdiagnosis by one of Finch's pet residents, an action that had saved a patient's life, but deeply embarrassed the chief of surgery. He had buried her in paperwork and undesirable shifts ever since. She was a loose nail he was determined to hammer down. "Maybe your unique brand of quiet diligence will work where others have failed," he said, the compliment a thinly veiled insult. "Or maybe it won't. Either way, the problem will be solved. Go, now." He turned and swept away, leaving a wake of cold fury behind him. Clara stood for a moment, the sterile dressings feeling heavy in her hands. She was a pawn in his game. She looked toward room 3. The door was closed, a flimsy barrier containing a world of pain and rage. She put the dressings down. She walked toward the door. Her steps were silent, measured, the ghost in blue scrubs, walking toward the fire. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the frantic, colorful glow of the monitors. The machines beeped a frantic, arrhythmic song of a body in crisis. The air was thick with the smell of blood and antiseptic, a primal scent of struggle. And in the bed, a man. Elias Vance was a landscape of controlled agony. He was propped up, his bare chest a roadmap of fading scars and fresh, vivid bruising that bloomed in shades of purple and black. One arm was in a cast, the other strapped to a board where the IV had been ripped out. A butterfly bandage was a stark white slash against his tanned skin. His face was tight, his jaw set like concrete. But it was his eyes that held her. They were chips of ice, narrowed and burning with a feverish, intelligent light. They tracked her every move. He was not a cornered animal. He was a hunter in a trap, wounded but no less dangerous, waiting, assessing. Clara did not approach the bed. She moved to the far side of the room, near the bank of monitors, placing herself out of his immediate reach. She gave him space. She didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic beeping of the machines. She studied the readouts, her mind translating the jagged lines and flashing numbers into a story. Tachycardia, blood pressure dangerously low, respiration shallow. He was a ticking clock. "Get out," he said. The voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. It was a command, not a request. Clara didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the monitors. "Your heart is beating at 140 beats per minute, Master Chief," she said, her voice calm, professional, detached. "Your systolic pressure is 80/50. You have significant internal bleeding. In approximately 1 hour, Maybe less. You will lose consciousness. Shortly after that, you will die." She stated the facts as if reading a grocery list. There was no pity in her voice, no fear, only data. A low, dangerous sound rumbled in his chest. "I said, get out." "Dr. Finch wants me to sedate you," she continued, still not looking at him. "He gave me a direct order, said he'd sign off on whatever I had to do to get you under control." She finally turned her head and met his gaze. Her own eyes were a calm, steady gray. "I'm not going to do that. Forcibly medicating a patient who is of sound mind is illegal, and you, despite your current situation, appear to be of very sound mind." He watched her, his suspicion a palpable force in the room. He had been expecting another nurse with a placating smile and a hidden syringe. He had not been expecting this quiet, direct woman who spoke of death and legality in the same flat tone. Clara moved from the monitors to the countertop, her back mostly to him. She began methodically preparing a new saline drip, her movements economical and precise. She unwrapped the sterile packaging, her fingers working with an ingrained muscle memory. It was a simple, non-threatening task, a routine. "You're a soldier," she said, her voice still quiet. "You understand triage. You understand the hierarchy of threats. Right now, the biggest threat to you isn't me. It's the ruptured spleen that's filling your abdomen with blood." The sleeve of her scrubs was slightly too short. As she reached for the IV tubing, the cuff rode up her arm, exposing her wrist to the dim light of the monitors. There, on the delicate skin just above her wrist bone, was a scar. It wasn't a neat surgical line. It was a small, jagged starburst, pale against her skin. A pucker of tissue that looked like it had been earned, not given. It was the kind of scar that came from something sharp and unforgiving. A piece of shrapnel, the edge of a rock in a hard fall, the tooth of a broken gear. Vance's burning eyes locked onto it. The change was instantaneous. It was as if a switch had been flipped deep inside him. The raw hostility in his gaze vanished, replaced by an intense, laser-focused stillness. The tension in his shoulders did not lessen, but it transformed from aggression to pure, silent assessment. The hunter was no longer looking at a threat, but at a puzzle. His breathing hitched just once. He went completely, utterly silent. The beeping of the machine seemed to grow louder in the sudden vacuum of his hostility. Clara continued her work, pretending not to notice his shift in focus, giving him a moment to process. She knew he had seen it. That was the point. It was a calculated risk, a signal flare in the dark. She finished prepping the bag and turned back toward him, the IV line coiled in her hand. She stopped a safe distance from the bed. "Master Chief Vance," she said, her voice a shade softer now. "My name is Clara. I am not going to hurt you, but I am also not going to let you die. It would look bad on my resume." A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but the memory of one, touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first hint of humanity she had seen. The dry, sardonic humor was a language she understood perfectly. His eyes moved from the scar back to her face, searching, really seeing her for the first time. He saw past the pale blue scrubs and the tired lines around her eyes. He saw the ramrod straightness of her spine, the way she held her head, the economy of her movements, the utter lack of fear in her gaze. These were not the things you learned in nursing school. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a barely audible rasp. "Tridents fall," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A key slid into a lock. Clara's expression did not change, but a universe of confirmation passed between them in that shared glance. Her training screamed at her to deny, to deflect, but her instincts told her this man's life depended on the truth. "Only in the rain," she replied, the words feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years. It was a countersign, a phrase from a brutal, specialized training course, so obscure, so deeply buried in the special operations community that no civilian nurse could possibly know it. It spoke of shared hardship, of mud and cold, and pushing the human body past every conceivable limit. It was a password that meant, "I have been where you have been. I am one of you." Elias Vance closed his eyes. A long, shuddering breath escaped his lips, a sound of profound, bone-deep relief. The fight drained out of him, leaving behind a man clinging to the edge by a thread. When he opened his eyes again, the hunter was gone. In his place was just a soldier who had found an ally on a battlefield he did not understand. "My left side," he rasped, his voice raw. "Felt a pop, below the ribs, not from the fall. Something else, something sharp." Clara's mind raced. The official report said blunt force trauma. A pop, something sharp. It didn't add up. "Okay," she said, her voice now a low, conspiratorial murmur. She moved to his bedside, her actions fluid and confident. He didn't flinch as she gently took his uninjured arm. His skin was cold, clammy. "I'm going to start this line. Saline first, then a blood transfusion. I need to get your pressure up before you code." He nodded, his gaze fixed on her face, his trust absolute and terrifying in its completeness. She slid the needle into his vein with practiced ease, her touch sure and steady. He didn't even wince. Blood flashed in the chamber, dark and vital. She secured the line, the clear fluid beginning its slow, life-giving drip into his arm. "They are watching," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the door. "Can't trust them, any of them." "Who is watching?" Clara asked, her voice low as she adjusted the drip rate. "Don't know. The report, the accident. It's a lie." His words were becoming slurred, the effort of speaking immense. Wasn't an accident. It was a message. Clara's blood ran cold. This was far beyond a difficult patient. She was standing in the middle of something she couldn't see. A conspiracy that had followed this man from some distant, violent place right into the sterile, supposedly safe confines of St. Jude's General. The door swung open, and Dr. Finch stood there, his face a mask of impatient fury. "What is going on in here, Hale? I expected him sedated and prepped for surgery an hour ago." He strode into the room, his expensive shoes squeaking, breaking the fragile peace. Vance's shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. His eyes, which had been fixed on Clara with trust, now swiveled to Finch, and the icy hostility was back, tenfold. "Get him out," Vance snarled, the words directed at Clara, but the venom aimed squarely at the chief of surgery. Finch stopped, taken aback. He looked from Vance's furious face to the IV drip in his arm. He saw the monitors, the numbers still critical, but no longer in a death spiral. He saw that Clara had succeeded where everyone else had failed, and he did not look pleased. He looked furious. "I am the chief of surgery," Finch announced, puffing out his chest. "I will not be ordered out of a room in my own hospital by a patient. Nurse, you will bring him up to speed on his condition." "He wants you to leave," Clara said, her voice flat. She stood between Finch and the bed, a small woman in blue scrubs forming a human shield made of silence and authority. Finch's face mottled with rage. "Are you refusing a direct order, Hale?" I am respecting my patient's wishes, she countered, her gaze unwavering. He is lucid and has the right to refuse a consultation. It's his legal right. She was using his own playbook against him, twisting the rules and regulations into a barrier. Finch looked from her to Vance, whose glare was now one of pure, murderous intent. He was a man who understood chain of command, and Finch was an enemy commander. For a moment, Finch looked like he might physically push her aside, but something in her stance, something in the absolute certainty in her eyes, gave him pause. He was a bully, and bullies falter when their targets don't flinch. Fine, he hissed, the word sharp with venom. Have it your way, but when he codes and his death lands this hospital in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, it will be your name on the report, your license, your career. He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room was silent again. The threat lingered in the air. Vance let out a shaky breath. Him, he whispered, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying certainty. He's part of it. Clara looked from the closed door to the man in the bed. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a co-conspirator, a guardian, and she was in more danger than she could possibly imagine. The sterile white walls of the hospital had just become a cage, and she was locked inside with a man who had powerful enemies. Enemies who were already inside the wire. The next few hours were a blur of controlled, quiet activity. Clara became a fortress, defending the perimeter of room 3. She used every rule in the hospital's bloated manual, every piece of bureaucratic red tape she had learned over the years, as a weapon. When a phlebotomist arrived for a blood draw ordered by Finch, Clara calmly explained that the patient was refusing all non-essential procedures, and that she had already drawn all necessary labs herself. She logged the refusal meticulously in the digital chart, creating a clear, undeniable paper trail. When a different nurse showed up with a hanging bag of medication, a powerful sedative that wasn't on Vance's chart, Clara intercepted her at the door. There must be a mistake, Clara said, her voice pleasantly firm. This wasn't ordered by the attending physician. Dr. Finch called it in himself, the nurse said, looking confused. A verbal order said the patient was agitated. He's resting quietly, Clara replied, not moving from the doorway. Hospital policy requires a written or digital signature for a medication of this class. I'm sure you understand. I can't accept it. The nurse, flustered, retreated. Clara watched her go, then immediately went to the supply closet and checked the lot number on the sedative. It was from a batch known to have severe side effects in patients with internal trauma. It could have induced cardiac arrest. It wasn't a mistake. It was an assassination attempt, cloaked in plausible deniability. A chill snaked down her spine. Finch wasn't just trying to control the situation. He was actively trying to harm Vance. Inside the room, she worked to stabilize him. She administered blood, managed his pain with medication she personally drew from the dispensary, and monitored his vitals with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She was no longer just his nurse. She was his lifeline. Vance, for his part, remained quiet, conserving his strength. But his eyes followed her everywhere. He was watching her, studying her, this unexpected angel of mercy with the soul of a sentinel. In his moments of lucidity, he spoke in short, clipped sentences, feeding her pieces of the puzzle. A supplier. Defective gear, he rasped at one point, his gaze distant. Ceradyne solutions, body armor. Plates were cracking under stress tests. People died. Clara sponged his forehead, her mind filing the name away. Ceridine Solutions. I was the investigator, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. Found the paper trail, led high up, very high. They buried it. And they found out you knew, Clara murmured, understanding dawning. He gave a weak nod. The training op was a setup. The fall was real, but the shrapnel, that wasn't part of the plan. He grimaced, a fresh wave of pain washing over him. It was meant to look like an accident, a tragic, unavoidable accident. And St. Jude's General was supposed to be the place where that accident became fatal, where a busy, understaffed hospital, under the direction of a corrupt chief of surgery, would provide the perfect cover for a quiet medical murder. Finch's connection must be through the supplier, a kickback scheme, a lucrative partnership. Ceridine Solutions must have a medical division, or Finch was on their payroll in some other capacity. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. I need to make a call, Vance said, his voice gaining a sliver of urgency. There's a number, a secure line. They need to know I'm here. They need to know I'm alive. Clara looked at the hospital phone on the wall. It was a joke. Every line would be monitored. Her own cell phone was a risk. Finch was watching her, she was sure of it. He was waiting for her to make a mistake. If you were in Clara's position, would you risk your career, maybe even your life, to make that call? Or would you trust the system, hoping for the best? Clara knew the system was broken. Finch was the system. Give me the number, she said. The plan was simple, and that was its strength. During her official break, Clara left the ICU. She didn't walk to the staff lounge or the cafeteria. Instead, she took a winding, circuitous route through the hospital's labyrinthine corridors, past the bustling outpatient clinics, down to the echoing, near-empty basement where the laundry and records departments were housed. She knew there was a rarely used service elevator at the far end, one that maintenance crews used. It had an old, analog emergency phone inside, a direct line to an outside operator that bypassed the hospital's main switchboard. It was a relic, an analog ghost in a digital machine. She felt eyes on her. A janitor who lingered too long in a hallway. A resident who seemed to appear around two different corners. Paranoia was a cage, but sometimes the cage was a perfect replica of reality. She ducked into a linen closet, her heart pounding, and waited a full 2 minutes. When she emerged, the hallway was empty. Inside the rattling, claustrophobic service elevator, she picked up the heavy black receiver. It buzzed with a dial tone that sounded a century old. She punched in the number Vance had given her. It was long, with an unusual prefix. It rang once, twice. A clipped professional voice answered. No greeting, just go. Clara's own training, buried under years of nursing school and hospital shifts, surged to the surface. She fell back into the language of her former life. This is Nightingale, she said, using a call sign she hadn't spoken in a decade. I have a package, Broken Arrow. Repeat, package is Broken Arrow. There was a pause on the other end. She could hear the faint click of a keyboard. Location? The voice asked, sharp and alert. St. Jude's General, ICU Room 3. The package is compromised by a local asset, codename Surgeon. Understood, Nightingale, the voice said. Hold position. Asset is inbound. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, Clara said, and hung up. She leaned against the cold metal wall of the elevator, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The call had taken less than 30 seconds, but in that half-minute she had crossed a line. She had stepped out of the world of civilian rules and into a shadow war. Nightingale. The name felt like a ghost on her tongue. It was a person she had tried to bury, a life she had fled. But like a soldier's muscle memory, it had been there when she needed it. Returning to the ICU, she found Finch waiting for her just outside Vance's room. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smug, predatory smile on his face. "Long break, Hale," he said. "Everything all right? You look a little flushed." "I'm fine, doctor," she said, her voice steady. "Just needed some air." "I've been reviewing Master Chief Vance's chart," he said, tapping a tablet he was holding. "His condition is deteriorating. I'm overriding his refusal of treatment. It's my duty as Chief of Surgery to act in his best interest. I'm taking him into surgery myself, now." It was the endgame. He was going to get Vance on his operating table, where a simple slip of the knife, an incorrect dosage of anesthesia, would be a fatal, untraceable complication. "You can't do that," Clara said, standing her ground. "He's stable. His pressure is rising." "He is bleeding internally, and you are a nurse. You will follow my orders," Finch snapped, his voice rising. He gestured to two large orderlies who had appeared behind him as if from nowhere. "Prep him for transfer." Clara moved to block the door. "No, no," Finch laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Hale, you are fired. Security will escort you from the building. Now get out of my way." The orderlies started to move forward. Clara braced herself. She was one woman against three men. The odds were impossible. She had failed. And then a new voice cut through the tension. A voice that carried an authority that made Finch's seem like a child's imitation. "That will not be necessary." They all turned. Standing at the end of the corridor were three men. The two on the flanks were in sharp, dark suits, their posture rigid, their eyes constantly scanning. The man in the middle was in the immaculate dress uniform of a United States Navy admiral. His white uniform was a stark slash against the drab hospital walls. Stars gleamed on his shoulders. His face was carved from granite, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to see right through Finch's bluster and into the rotten core beneath. This was not a man who asked for permission. This was a man who reshaped reality to his will. Admiral Jackson strode forward, his footsteps silent and purposeful. He did not look at the orderlies or at Finch. His gaze was locked on Clara. "Nurse Hale?" he asked, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, her own posture straightening instinctively. "I'm Admiral Jackson," he said. "I believe you have a package for me." Finch's face went pale. He stared at the Admiral, his smug confidence evaporating like mist. "Admiral," he stammered, rushing forward, his hand outstretched. "Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery. This is an honor. We were just preparing to take Master Chief Vance into surgery. His condition is precarious." Admiral Jackson ignored the outstretched hand. His eyes remained on Clara. "Report," he commanded. And so she did. Standing there in the hallway, with Finch looking on in horror and the Admiral listening with unnerving stillness, Clara gave her report. She spoke in the clipped, precise language of a field medic. She detailed Vance's vitals, the inconsistencies in his reported injuries, the suspicious medication order, Finch's attempts to block her and override the patient's rights. She didn't editorialize. She just stated the facts. It was a calm, methodical, and utterly devastating takedown. When she finished, there was a heavy silence. Admiral Jackson finally turned his gaze to Finch. The full weight of his command presence descended on the surgeon. "Dr. Finch," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. My man was sent to your hospital following a mishap. I am told he was investigating a significant matter of national security involving a contractor called Ceradyne Solutions. Finch began to sweat. I wouldn't know anything about that. I'm a surgeon. Are you? The Admiral countered, taking a step closer. Because my intelligence suggests you sit on the board of a holding company that owns a significant share of Ceradyne's medical supply subsidiary. A subsidiary that has received hundreds of millions of dollars in non-competitive defense contracts over the last 5 years. Contracts that Master Chief Vance was about to expose as fraudulent. Finch sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. This is outrageous. Slander. My lawyers. Your lawyers will be busy, the Admiral cut in, his voice like ice. He held up a small, encrypted data chip. This was recovered from Master Chief Vance's personal effects. It contains a full record of your communications with Ceradyne's CEO, including the one from this morning, where you assured him that the problem would be surgically removed by the end of the day. The color drained completely from Finch's face. He looked trapped, cornered. He had been so sure of his power within the walls of his hospital that he never imagined a greater power could simply walk through the door and dismantle his world. You are a disgrace to your profession and a traitor to your country, the Admiral stated, his voice ringing with cold fury. He gave a slight nod to the men in suits. They moved forward, flanking Finch. Dr. Alistair Finch, one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion as he flashed a badge. You are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder and treason. Finch stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The entire ward had gone silent. Nurses and doctors stood in doorways, watching the public execution of their tyrant's career. The blustering, untouchable chief of surgery simply deflated, all the arrogance and power draining out of him, leaving behind a small, pathetic, sweating man. As they led him away in handcuffs, his expensive shoes scuffing on the floor he once commanded, his gaze fell on Clara one last time. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He had underestimated her. He had seen a quiet nurse, a pawn to be sacrificed. He had never imagined he was looking at the woman who would be his downfall. The Admiral watched him go, his expression grim. Then he turned back to Clara. The hardness in his eyes softened slightly, replaced by a deep, profound respect. Nightingale, he said, the call sign a quiet acknowledgement of the world she came from. That was a good call. You saved his life. I was just doing my job, Admiral, she said, the familiar deflection feeling hollow even to her. No, he corrected her gently. You did more than your job. Your file is impressive. Corpsman, attached to DevGru, multiple commendations. You left the service after the ambush in Kandahar. Said you wanted a quieter life. He gave a small, sad smile. Doesn't seem to have worked out that way. He knew. Of course, he knew. He had probably read her entire classified file on the flight over. He knew about the ambush, the lives she had saved, the one she couldn't. The reason she had traded her combat fatigues for hospital scrubs, hoping to find a place where the life and death decisions were simpler. Master Chief Vance is being transferred to Walter Reed Medical Center, the Admiral continued, his tone shifting back to business. My team will handle the transport, but I have a proposition for you, Hale. He paused, his gaze intense. I'm putting together a new unit, a specialized medical liaison team that works directly with my operators in the field and during recovery. It requires a unique skill set, someone who understands both medicine and the mindset of a soldier. someone who can operate with discretion and courage under extreme pressure. He didn't need to say anything more. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a homecoming, a chance to use all of who she was, the nurse and the soldier, without having to hide either part. It was a position of respect, of power, of purpose. "I'm offering you a commission," he said. "Lieutenant Commander, you'd be in charge of the entire program. Your first assignment will be overseeing Master Chief Vance's recovery." Clara was speechless. Hours ago, she had been on the verge of being fired, a disgraced nurse in a dead-end job, ruled by a petty tyrant. Now she was being offered a command. It was a dizzying, breathtaking reversal of fortune. "I accept, sir," she managed to say. "Good," the Admiral said with a decisive nod. "Welcome back to the fold, Commander." He used the new title easily, naturally, and for the first time in a very long time, it felt right. An hour later, the hospital was a hive of quiet, military efficiency. The Admiral's team had taken over. Vance was prepped for transport by a new set of medics, their movements as precise and confident as Clara's own. Before they took him, Clara went into room 3, one last time. Vance was conscious, his pain managed, his vitals stable. He looked better already, the deep lines of agony on his face having eased. He watched her approach the bed. No words were needed. Their shared experience had forged a bond deeper than language. He knew what she had risked for him. She knew the burden he carried. He slowly lifted his uninjured hand. She took it. His grip was weak, but firm. "Thank you, Nightingale," he whispered. "Get some rest, Master Chief," she said, her voice soft. "I'll see you at Walter Reed." A look of understanding passed between them. He wasn't just her patient anymore. She was his new commanding officer. She let go of his hand and walked out of the room. She didn't look back. Clara Hale walked through the corridors of St. Jude's General for the last time. The nurses and residents she passed looked at her with a new sense of awe and respect. The whispers followed her down the hall. The quiet nurse who had taken down the chief of surgery and faced down an admiral. She was a legend in the making. But Clara didn't hear them. She was already somewhere else. Her mind was on logistics, on personnel files, on the challenges of building a new unit from the ground up. She pushed open the heavy glass doors at the hospital entrance and stepped out into the cool, pre-dawn air. The city was still asleep, the sky just beginning to blush with the first hints of pink and gray. The air smelled clean, fresh. It was the smell of a new beginning. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs. The weight of her old life, the humiliation, the frustration, the feeling of being underestimated and trapped, it all just fell away. She had been a ghost in pale blue scrubs, a victim, a pawn. Not anymore. She was Commander Hale, and she was just getting started. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. These stories are a labor of love, and your support is what truly keeps this channel going. If you enjoyed Clara's journey to vindication, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It makes a bigger difference than you know. And for my question of the day, have you ever been in a situation where you were completely underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. There's another story locked and loaded for you on the screen right now. I'll see you over there.